democracy. What was Brandeis said? You can have great wealth in this country, or you can have democracy, but you can't have both.
And I think Teddy Roosevelt would have said the same thing.
Mm-hmm, he would have.
But Justice C.L.U.E, was it, in this current? Hi, are we on the air, guys? Okay, we're here today on the next step, and we're going to pick up a show that we did once before with Nick Beeson and our guest Deborah McCoy, a registered nurse.
Hi.
The first show we did was called JAILS as Asylums, and the point of that title was to try to point out that in Santa Barbara County, as in the world at large, but especially in the lower level county jail systems, a huge percentage of the population of these institutions are people who have been diagnosed with mental health problems and or mental health and drug problems or mental health and alcohol problems, but are people who would not the best use of a jail to put people with mental health problems in that facility. It's expensive, and as a country we have refused, since the deinstitutionalization especially, to build locked or health facilities where these folks can be cared for and treated. In California, we do have potentially some new revenues coming in that would help this, but there's still this pressure to use those revenues for either administrative or programs, but not for actual treatment facilities, is my bias. And there's also pressure to try to co-opt that money into building or allowing the expansion of jails. So Nick and his group, FamiliesACT and Clergy United for Economic Justice, a few months ago presented a study they prepared to the Board of Supervisors. Nick, tell us about that.
Okay, so the study was done by C.L.U.E, and that's Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice. And we entitled it very simply, "Why Are We Still Taking People with Mental Illness to Jail Who Don't Belong There?" And that was our ultimate conclusion, because we wanted to find out, first off, are there people being taken to jail who could be taken directly to treatment centers instead? And if so, how many were there? And so we were trying to get to the bottom of that. And essentially, the best numbers we could come up with based on interviews with jail personnel and talking with people within the system was about 150 per day in Santa Barbara County Jail are people that are non-dangerous and sitting in our jail who really, the better option would have been to take them straight to a treatment facility. And the dilemma in our community is we don't have enough of those treatment facilities.
Well, we've talked about that numerous times.
Yes.
Santa Barbara County's resistance to creating more treatment beds within the county, especially within the county.
Correct.
Deborah, you're involved, you're a public health nurse?
Yes, I am.
Registered nurse?
Yes, I am.
And you've been involved in the mental health problem in this community, both as a provider of services?
Right.
And also as a family participant?
That's correct. My daughter has schizoaffective disorder, and because of that, she's also dually diagnosed, which means that she has a substance abuse disorder as well. And with those, she has been arrested and she has been put in jail. She took a car, and of course that is a crime. However, God told her that she could have a car that day. So I don't think that it was a malicious, intentional crime of any kind.
So she would be one of these people that Nick's talking about.
Absolutely.
Who ended up in the county jail.
Absolutely.
And the expense of incarceration in the county jail and all the attendant services, Nick, that you've discussed about it, but it's substantially more money than it would cost to provide this woman's daughter with actual beneficial treatment versus just incarceration.
Right. Exactly. And she ended up on probation, and because of her inability to stay clean, she ended up in our jail for 3 months. And I'm sorry, but it has changed her. She's a different person now.
And I think that's a factor that people don't take into we all assume that, I mean, there's this fantasy that jail or any punishment is a form, well, either rehabilitate or control behavior, when in fact so often, my experience as a public defender, and yours, Nicholas, I'm sure, saw a hardening and a changing and a destruction of personalities, often from people who were repeatedly subjected to the process of the courts, I think, and in the jails.
Well, what it leads to is this recycling through the system that just becomes more and more costly for all of us. And so this is an issue that really transcends all political boundaries, all class systems, because it affects so many people. Estimates are 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 adults will experience some kind of debilitating mental illness in the course of their lifetime. And so we're all potentially going to see somebody in our family or ourselves in a situation that what we really need is help. Now, it boggles the mind that we would know this and still take people to jail, where even under the best of circumstances, even if you had the best type of mental health treatment within the jail, you would still be in a circumstance that is exacerbating the dilemma.
I'm not even going to concede what you just said, Nick, because the jail is never going to be a proper place to provide health care services or mental health services. I mean, for a zillion reasons, the security rules. I mean, I've seen pictures of therapy sessions in prisons and jails where the therapist is sitting in the hallway and the inmates are in behind bars trying to speak and communicate with her. And you'll never convince me that anything like that is meaningful, number one. Number two, the person goes into jail and leaves jail based on criminal justice sentencing. It has nothing to do with the treatment program.
That's correct. And in our jail particularly, those who might be on medication who then are put in jail, the medications are not continued, so they deteriorate. So any kind of progress we made or any help that we gave them through alcohol, drug, mental health services through the county, all of those dollars just melt away and are no longer of any value.
Well, and that's the other part of it. The jail will provide the cheapest medical care it can provide.
Correct.
Cheapest health care it can provide. The idea of psychiatric or mental health care in a jail is almost anathema to the jail institution, in my opinion.
Right.
They think it's an excuse. They think that these are just acting out people. They're used to being tough and whatever. So let's get back to this. You've done this wonderful report based on your research, grand jury reports and others, and you demonstrated in that report and presented to the Board of Supervisors proof that they could save substantial amounts of money if they would expand residential and other care facilities outside of jails.
That's exactly it. And there's a frustration to that finding, and I'll go into that in a second. But what we did in this report is we spoke to people within the current system, people at the jail that are responsible for trying to house folks that are brought in. Police officers, we've got some wonderful restorative police officers in the community who have expressed to us their frustration at not having alternative places to go.
Right.
And so when they're called out, and family members, of course, who we've spoken to, both at FACT and other members in the community, who essentially call the police as a last resort. They've called places to try to get a placement for their family member who's in distress. They can't find anybody, and then they call the police because the person may be acting out. They don't know what to do. The police come. They want to take them to the right place most of the time when they're educated, like these restorative police officers are. And they run into we just don't have a bed at the inn, as it were, for treatment.
In your daughter's situation, did you ever try to find care outside of out of the criminal justice system for her that was refused?
Yes, I did several times try to find something to help her. And what I found is that the safety net is Swiss cheese. It doesn't exist. It's so full of holes.
And you're an insider, so to speak.
Correct. And her father was a criminal defense lawyer. And if a public health nurse and attorney cannot help their own child through the system, what do the rest of the people do? Okay,
let's go back to the basics here in Santa Barbara County. For the 40 years that I've been in this county, we've had one facility, a psychiatric health facility, is a locked care facility, and it has 16 beds.
Yes.
And it's been that number despite the increasing population of both the jail and the county as a whole, and it's not increasing.
Correct.
Is the board of you're petitioning the Board of Supervisors, among other things, I hope, to provide more treatment housing.
Okay, so what you're talking about is what we call the PUF facility, the
I
psychiatric
don't-
height.
We've discussed before, it's a euphemism I don't
Understood.
care for, okay.
but a lot of people within the system
I know
do
they-
refer to it. It's
yeah,
the
but
psychiatric.
The audience may not.
The psychiatric health facility, and there have for 30 years been 16 beds in this county. Now our population has grown. There
Right.
ought to be, by most estimates, at least 60 of those beds. Just traditionally, we know that this many people will have the kind of psychiatric issues that crop up where they could be a danger to themselves or others, and they should be taken to these lockdown facilities. Now, in addition to that, the lack of more of those beds, when we've only had 16 for all that time, and so it's cost us a lot to contract with other counties to send people there when those get overflown. What we found at the jail was they've got 4 padded cells where people get taken in who have severe psychiatric breakdowns, and they're put into these padded cells as they await a bed to open up in this psychiatric health facility, one of the 16 beds. And so people can really languish in really despicable conditions, for a humane society. Well, we try to expand that. There is an effort to expand those facilities. I'm hopeful that there are some changes on the horizon. But there's another component of the system, and that's kind of the Debbie's daughter situation, where it's somebody that's not necessarily a danger to themselves or others. They just need a lower level of treatment that's still not available. Now, we do have some. Don't get us wrong, there are some people in the community that are trying to address this issue. There's just not enough. And so what we found in our report, and this is the frustrating part, was that the county has had 2 big organizations, the Sheriff's Blue Ribbon Commission on a new jail, basically said what we're saying. There are a lot of people in jail that don't belong there. They would get better treatment outside. We need to address that issue. That was in 2008. In 2011, the grand jury did a report saying this recycling of homeless and mentally ill people through the system is not good. It's causing more damage, and it's costing us a lot of money. But more importantly, it's hurting us in our dignity as a society as well. So what the county response to that 2011 grand jury report was to ask the CEO of the county to look into what the cost would be for outside treatment as opposed to jail. Now, in their own findings, they found that per year, each person that's taken to jail that would be in treatment, if they were taken to treatment, each person would save the county almost $20,000 per year. And that was a rough estimate kind of study. We think, frankly, that it would be more than $20,000 per year.
Time being what it
Yes.
is, we've been through some of this before, and don't mean to cut you off.
Absolutely.
But the county could save $20,000 per person of maybe 20 to 40% of the population of the jail that could be cared for or might properly be cared for outside the jail.
The estimate from the jail staff we talked to in charge of placement put that number at 75% of the people with mental illness issues would be amenable. In other words, non-dangerous people could be in treatment.
And maybe at least 20% of the jail population. By
Overall,
most,
yes.
So a substantial number of people could be taken out of the jail, put into into care facilities, such as your daughter might have been. And we would save a huge amount of money, and yet we're not doing this. So even to this day. Now, you made your presentation to the Board of Supervisors a week ago?
Yes, on April 1st, both C.L.U.E and FACT presented to the Board of Supervisors a petition that was signed by 860 members of the community, wide group of people. And in the course of presenting that petition, we used the public comment period, and the Board of Supervisors were quite accommodating.
Yes.
We thank them for that, to allow about 20 people to speak and make a 2-minute presentation. And so we presented some of the highlights of our report. We've already, in doing this report, we put it out in December, and since then we've met with 4 of the 5 supervisors, as well as Dr. Wada and other members of the ADMHS staff here in Santa
It
Barbara.
was mentioned already, but last time I did this show, I got in trouble for saying ADAMHS. It's Alcohol, Drugs, Mental Health Services of the County of Santa Barbara.
That's
Correct.
correct.
It was used to be Mental Health Services, and anyway, it was all combined a few years back. And Dr. Wada is the current person in charge of that.
That's correct.
That's right.
So when you went to you said the board was receptive to your presentation, and did they make you any promises? Is there something that's coming up next? Anything that can continue to push this ball down the road, as they would say in some other forum? Is there something we can do to keep this moving?
Yes, actually from the DS, it was requested by Supervisor Carbajal that this discussion not end. He charged the CEO with actually doing some statistical reporting back to the board, and we, of course, are not going to let this issue rest. There is a report that ADMHS is required to present to the board itself because of the current change system that's in place. Back a year ago, there was a consultation that was done, and the consultants came back with a report, and it was pretty scathing when it came to what was wrong with alcohol, drug, mental health services.
Yes.
And since then, I have been involved, and many others have been involved in actually making changes in the system.
You are a member of a steering committee
Yes.
that's involved in this
That's
work.
right.
And tell us about the steering committee, just briefly, what nexus you have with alcohol, drugs, and mental health and the consumer community.
Well, they asked us, both consumers and family members, to become involved. NAMI is also involved, which is the National Alliance for Mental Illness, and they're very active as well because they are also family members, and FACT and C.L.U.E. And we keep seeming to put this coalition together. The steering committee is mostly made up of other alcohol, drug, mental health service people and their departments, and their whole point and their charter is to have work teams, action teams, produce results, bring them to the steering committee as recommendations, and then actually have the steering committee devote actual dollars and resources to carrying out those recommendations or altering them or whatever.
The steering committee used to devote dollars, but you actually, the steering committee recommend the expenditure of monies on
That's
these
correct.
projects? Yeah.
That's
So this
correct.
would be monies from the county,
Yes,
taxpayer-funded monies
Yes.
available. Is there, you mentioned that petition that you submitted to the Board of Supervisors. It was about 800 signatures. I remember before we talked and helped people get the access to that online so they could sign it, as I did, and no others in my friendship circles did. Is that still out there? Do we still want to keep this thing going, or is there anything that the citizens who might be watching or people could do to keep pushing this in front of the board or on the agenda, or is it now back in this bureaucratic process that so often just goes on its own way out of sight? Is there something we can do to keep this moving?
Yeah, I think there is, Glenn, and the petition is likely to be up on the FamiliesACT website, which is FamiliesACT.org, and you should be able to find the petition there. But the other thing community members can do, and we would really encourage people to do this, is contact the Board of Supervisors. Let their office know that you are not in favor of mentally ill people who could be placed in treatment being taken to jail, that it would be a better option for our taxpayer dollars. I mean, we all want to be prudent in how we spend our limited resources, to invest it in the right kind of treatment, and so we can avoid this constant 30 years. I mean, this 30 years is, I think, long enough. And so that's why we're really passionate about doing something now and getting this moving forward. And we do have a plan, by the way, ironically named Next Steps.
Is that right?
Yes, it
yes,
is.
it is.
Well, it's not that this is the most creative title for a program. By the way, I might mention that this program and all the others we do is available on YouTube and also on Ustream. And if anybody wants to find that, go online and you can look up The Next Step TVSB. And the reason we have to have that TVSB on there is because there are other programs of the same type name. But go online, you can see some of the programs. See the first program we did, and give you some more background that I'm trying to move through quickly here, and follow up here. Let's talk about the tension between the North County Jail, if there is any. In my mind, there may be. And the need for other facilities that would not be part of a jail or outside of a jail with maybe some, because the county is still under budgetary constraint. There's not a lot of money out in the county
That's right.
for infrastructure. There's some money for studying jails. There's some money for studying and planning them. There's a thing called the Prop 63 that passed by the voters 7, 8 years ago, 10 years ago now, where they assessed a surcharge on wealthy people's taxes.
Yes.
And that was to generate millions of dollars a year to be used specifically for health care. Where has that money gone, and is that money available, is any of that money available for these sort of purposes?
Well, we did not look at the Prop 63, like, where the funds are, where they're being dispersed. But let's get back to the first part of your question, which was, is there a tension between the jail and potentially this? We think that, it's, I mean, there are a lot of people within a number of organizations that feel the jail is maybe overbuilt. Just because you get the money doesn't necessarily mean that that's the right solution for our circumstances. Be that as it may, what the funding for the jail demonstrates is that when the county has the will to do something, they seem to be able to find the resources. There was a second portion to the jail that was requested by Sheriff Bill Brown that would do wonderful things, frankly, and I would like to see components of that incorporated into our jail facilities, whether they're newly built or existing, with rehabilitation and treatment.
Yes.
However, there was a grant that was offered, and the county was able to marshal $4 million from our reserve funds in order to match what we needed to get that grant of millions of dollars from the state. Now, if they're able to...
That grant for the new North County Jail proposal.
This is for the addition to the
jail.
The original grant was for about $90 million from the state, and we had to come up with $8 million roughly as a county. Then there was a second proposal brought in, let's build another 200 some odd beds on top of the jail that we're building in Santa Maria, and we'll need, the state's going to give us somewhere in $36 million range. They came up with $4 million for matching what the state needed. Now, if they could come up with that, we're asking that they come up with just a fraction of that for our Next Steps program, because we could build a number of the facilities we're talking about that are lacking in the community at a very reasonable price, and just to keep it as simple as I can.
But let me back up. I'm sorry.
Okay.
This $260 million additional supplemental monies that they got to build or 60 beds, whatever it was, that is, as I understood it, theoretically a more benign jail.
And it wasn't $260 million. It was, I believe, $36 million
and 260
to build 260 beds, roughly.
But the point I'm saying is that those are the kind of facilities that, if they were not attached to a jail, could do this service for much less money, I think.
Well, that's exactly right. We could build way more beds for that same $4 million that the county is putting in to build that facility.
Right.
And we could do a great job of really putting a dent in how many homeless people are out there with mental illness, how many mentally ill people get taken to jail. The whole spectrum would change dramatically. Now, we've got a step-by-step plan. It's a 5-year plan, so we're not building it all out at once. But for approximately $1.2 million of county resources that would be invested to build a facility that would house approximately 55 to 60 people and have treatment components built into it, right? We could then build a facility. That $1.2 million translates to about a $14 million facility through creative tax credits that would become available, and so that's a great investment.
But why isn't this? I mean, I agree. It is a great investment, and clearly, before we spend another 30, how many millions was it for this 260 bed addition?
County
36.
The county portion would be about $4 million. Now they got $36 million from the state. I analogize that to a gambling problem,
Well,
because
my-
if the house
I understand.
extends you
Well,
a big amount to gamble with, and they say all you got to come up with is
There's a
this
matching
amount.
fund, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to get into this now. The jails exist for a proper purpose. There's a
Absolutely.
need for jails.
Yes.
We're not talking about that. We're talking about who gets put in that jail.
Correct.
And what alternative ways we could do it at less expense with better results. And I don't want to forget that.
That's it.
And when the Board of Supervisors makes the decision to allow the sheriff, and I know that's a political tension there, because the sheriff is one of the biggest, most powerful political figures in any given county. So they have to be accommodating to him. On the other hand, that money could have been directed by the Board of Supervisors, it would seem to me, or at least some of it, to standalone or outside facilities, or even the ADMHS, to build something in replacement or an extension of the psychiatric health facility or other facilities. And that's not being done, I believe. Is that true?
We are in the process of trying to find somebody both within ADMHS and the Board of Supervisors to be an advocate for this effort, because it really does pencil out to be favorable both to the county, to the people that are involved, and to the taxpayers ultimately. And one of the funny things that we have to keep in mind between the tension between the jail and this dilemma is we've had supervisors tell us, look, it's not an either or. It's not we either build the jail or we do this. Let's try to work towards the solution where we can do both potentially. So we're taking them at their word that they want to do this. As long as we can find the funds to do this, we'd be really happy with that. Other people may be opposed to the jail on a number of grounds. Right. But here's something that we found in our report. In August of 2013, there was a poll done, and it was across all political lines. 80% of Californians, Californians were asked, would you prefer people that have mental health issues be placed in treatment or taken to jail? 80% of the respondents said we prefer treatment. This county was given that option with Measure S a few years ago. I believe it was 2010. Right. And to increase the sales tax to fund the jail.
And they didn't do it.
It didn't pass.
Okay, we're running out of time, so I want to get to a couple points that I hope we got to. ADHMS, County Mental Health, Alcohol and Drugs, recently got grants, $2.6 million.
Yes.
For quote-unquote expand its crisis services.
Yes.
And $8.3 million just recently, this last January, for more crisis teams. I'm reading the memo that Dr. Wada sent out, and best I can see is there may be some money spent on a crisis residential house for non-institutional settings for mental health clients up to 30 days. Is that the type of facility, a residential facility where people can actually reside?
For 30 days.
30 days.
But then we have
And
a
how many
problem about
beds?
where do they go after that?
Right.
Our understanding is somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 beds for one of the facilities.
So 8 beds. So, I mean, we're talking about 260 beds in addition to the jail, 1,000 bed jails around the county, out of 1,200, something like that. And yet we're talking about 16 beds in the psychiatric health facility, 8 beds in this. How can we get ADMHS and the Board of Supervisors to take some of these funds that I think are coming from Prop 63 and are otherwise available for these care facilities and actually build institutions that can be relied on?
Well,
yep.
One of the things I would say is that in the systems change that we're looking at, the crisis intervention section of ADMHS is one of the weakest links in the whole process. Historically, that's correct. And even the report that came out from the consultants said the same thing.
Well, we're going to have to finish right now, so that's it.
So the crisis part of it is going well, and we want to fix the back end of it with our Next Steps program.
Well, thank you for both being here, and thanks to the crew that we just had too much to talk about today. So we'll maybe